Greetings, everyone. I welcome you once again to our daily reflection for the month of May. Today is the 29th day. And I sincerely thank you for saying your rosaries and for joining us again today. We'll take a look at John chapter 2, verse 4. And in reply, Jesus said to Mary, "O woman, what have you to do with me? My hour has not yet come." See, child of God, the choice of the word woman for Mary by Jesus might seem harsh at first glance, as if he was pushing his mother away. And the reply Jesus gave in whole might appear disrespectful, especially in our present age. But in the ancient Jewish culture and in the wider context of the story, it is quite clear that those words reflect no disagreement or antagonism between Jesus and Mary, but rather something positive, and in actual fact, something beautiful about their relationship. See, child of God, in the Gospel of John, Jesus had used the title woman to address in a polite manner other women with whom he had had positive encounter. We see that in the readings of Easter Monday when Jesus tenderly appears to Mary Magdalene, John chapter 20, verse 15. We also see that when he forgives the sins of the woman caught in act of adultery in John chapter 8, verse 10. We also see that when he draws the Samaritan woman to faith and repentance in John chapter 4, verse 12. See, surely this indicates how positive Jesus applies the word woman. See, in the Greco-Roman world, ancient Israel, it was only okay for a man to address a female as woman. But for a son to do so would be something quite significant. This suggests that Jesus had something in particular for calling his mother woman. Something beyond the ordinary context, something symbolic. Why then did Jesus call his mother woman? Before we address that, it is important to establish the fact that Mary herself did not even interpret those words as derogatory. No, she did not walk away from the scene, and she did not feel hurt or insulted. In fact, she reacted in a positive manner, in an opposite manner as such, because she told the servants, "Do whatever he tells you." John chapter 2, verse 5. See, child of God, Jesus' own actions also indicates that he looks with favor on Mary's request and petition. In fact, he supplied much more wine than Mary or any other person in that particular feast would have imagined. See, Jesus ended up providing 120 gallons of wine. Definitely, such tremendous overabundance was not a sign of rejection. Neither can it be a sign of disapproval nor a sign of disregard for Mary's request. See, now let us go back to that word woman. There is something significant about that title woman used for Mary in the light of John's Gospel. You see, the Gospel of John starts, I want you to listen carefully, with "in the beginning," which can be traced to Genesis chapter 1, verse 1. See, in the next 4 verses, John goes on to write of light, life, creation, and light shining in darkness. Images taken right from the creation story. See, John draws the story of Jesus against the backdrop of the story of creation, showing how Jesus comes to bring about a renewal of creation. See, John sets up a series of days that establishes a new creation week, like did in Genesis chapter 1. See, the sequences begins with chapter 1, verse 1, with the phrase, in the beginning. Now, John then demarcates a second day, like in Genesis, in John chapter 1, verse 29, with the words, the next day. He then uses the same phrase to note a third day in John chapter 1, verse 35, and a fourth day in John chapter 1, verse 43. Finally, after the succession of these first 4 days, the story of the wedding at Cana is introduced as taking place 3 days after the fourth day. That is 7 days in a row. On the third day, there was a marriage at Cana. John chapter 2, verse 1. See, child of God, the third day after the fourth day, as 7 days in a row, will now represent the seventh day, as in the book of Genesis. So John presented that 7th day in his own gospel. Consequently, the wedding at Cana comes at the climax of the new creation week, the 7th day. Child of God, do you see the link between the two? Now, in the book of Genesis, in the Genesis themes, the background, this title would bring to mind the woman of Genesis. Remember, Eve, in Genesis chapter 2, verse 23, and in Genesis chapter 3, verse 20. She played an important role in the history, first prophecy given to humanity. Yes, God confronted the serpent, announcing his defeat. And he said, I will put enmity between you and the woman, and between your seed and her seed. He shall bruise your head, and you shall strike his heel. Genesis chapter 3, verse 15. Given at the dawn of creation, these words, known as the proto-evangelium, the first gospel, and foretells how the woman one day will have a seed, a son, who will crush the head of the serpent. And centuries later, at the wedding feast at Cana, this same prophecy, this very prophecy begins to be fulfilled by calling Mary woman, with the creation story at the background. As John alluded to, Jesus in the narrative of John's gospel is not merely addressing her politely, but rather, as he did for Mary Magdalene or the Samaritan woman, the other woman in the gospel of John, rather he was identifying Mary as the woman of Genesis chapter 3, verse 15. Yes, child of God, far from rebuking his mother or distancing himself from her, Jesus, in calling Mary woman, honors her in a way unique, more than any other person has been done before. See, child of God, she is the new Eve, the woman whose long-awaited son will defeat the devil and fulfill the prophecy of Genesis. Child of God, do you now get this picture clear? Who are we talking about here? Mother Mary. What stops you from believing, honoring, and giving her the due respect and honor God himself has accorded her? Why do you cast out about saying your rosary? Why not you pick up your rosary today? This is the very same woman prophesied a long time ago, from whom our salvation was given to us in the person of our Lord Jesus Christ. She can really help us, especially at this time of crisis. Pick up the rosary. Let us pray. Dear Jesus, may I forever be among the generation that honor, respect, and revere your mother. Grant that through her I may worship you, adore you, learn how to do your will, and bless you now and forever. Amen. Lord be with you. May Almighty God bless you, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. Thank you for joining us again today. Remember to say your rosary. See you again tomorrow. God bless you.